Hello again. I'm Scott Weinberg, your host, and welcome again to The Lawyer's View. Do we as a society take care of our veterans when they come back from the service with emotional and physical problems? Where do many of our veterans end up after they come back? Do you know that 1 out of every 3 veterans has some type of emotional problem that needs treatment? And yet the problem is so many of our veterans turn to drugs and alcohol to try and self-medicate. Others start with prescriptions doled out by doctors and then get addicted, start abusing the medications. And where do many of these veterans end up? Well, you guessed it, in our criminal justice system and unfortunately many times in jail. So what, if anything, is our justice system doing to help our servicemen and women? Well, today we're joined by 2 people trying to make a difference in the courts and helping our veterans on what they call Veterans Court. We want to welcome Alexandra Black. She's the Chief Probation Officer in the 52nd District Court in Novi, Michigan, and Mike McGlone, Veterans Court Probation Officer. Welcome both of you to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for coming. Now, we know that I've been to Veterans Court graduation. I was so impressed, especially with you, Mike, with your speech you gave and also with the graduation. But what I want to do is I want to get the audience to know what exactly is Veterans Court and how it helps our local community, not just Novi, but here in Michigan.
Well, like you said, Scott, 30 to 40% of the 1.6 million troops coming back from Afghanistan have experienced some sort of mental disability at this point. Post-traumatic stress disorder is obviously a large problem. They're going to perhaps have traumatic brain injuries, and they are coming back into our system and, you know, getting into trouble. And I've personally been a probation officer for many, many years, and we've never had any other way to treat them than like everyone else. So what we're doing with the Veterans Court program and through Mike's hard work is treating them like, and for lack of a better term, I think Judge McKenzie uses this sometimes, a hero.
Correct. Now, Judge McKenzie is the judge in Novi Court that he's really taken this by storm. I mean, he really does so much for, I think, veterans, but also for the drug court in the state of Michigan, right?
Yes, he started our Veterans Court. It was his project, if you will. He's always been very, proactive in getting new programs and other ways to deal with criminogenic needs, and that's one of the things that we do through Veterans Court is we treat all their criminogenic needs. So perhaps they come back from, war and they've got an injury that hasn't been addressed, and maybe they've got some red tape through the VA, and I think Michael can speak to this.
But Mike, so one of the things that, of course, you guys only see it once they get in trouble.
That's
right?
correct.
You don't see it when they're coming back, and just for treatment, you're seeing it when they got a drunk driving, or
Assault
they
and
have
battery.
some domestic violence, something like that.
Yep.
And how do you and how does the court treat it differently than just someone else coming in for, let's say, a drunk driving?
Well, first we have to recognize that they are a vet, and then once we do that, Judge McKenzie will place them into a Veterans Court program. Now, they have the option of whether they want to come or not.
Now, why would someone not want to go into the Veterans Court?
I don't even ask that question because I ask them and I tell them that this is the best thing for them.
So what advantage do they have when they go into the Veterans Court?
Well, usually the vets that come back don't realize the benefits that they have.
Like what?
One, if you go to the VA, you get free benefits, health care, free physicals. You have a disability, you can get that taken care of. I've had most of the guys really realize now that they're hard of hearing, they have the new high-tech hearing aids that they're getting for free. Mm-hmm. So a lot of their health care is paid off. It's not paid off, but it's paid for.
But they have resources. Obviously, these are resources that you're saying are available for any vet, right?
That's correct, but most
it has
of them,
nothing to do with the Veterans Court.
most vets that come back are unemployed. So
Which is unbelievable, too.
That's
I mean, how we really, I don't want to turn this into a discussion about how we take care of vets outside necessarily the criminal justice system, but it seems criminal to me, how we treat and how we take care of our vets.
It's been history, right?
When they come out.
Haven't we always?
Really? I don't know, after World War I, it seems like we started taking care of everybody.
And then it stopped.
But after Vietnam, it definitely
Vietnam.
seems like we don't.
Right.
But so getting back to the Veterans Court, when someone gets in trouble, let's
Correct.
say drunk driving,
Mm-hmm.
do they have an option of coming in Veterans Court?
Yes.
What are the benefits of if you're in the Veterans Court, different than if you just, for instance, got a drunk driving and you're not in Veterans Court?
Care. There's no other way for me to say it.
Right.
Usually vets get along better with vets. So if you've got a room full of veterans who are in the Veterans Court, sometimes it's a helping aid. They can see what other vets are going through, and they kind of pick each other up and carry each other through the program.
You know, and that's actually, and I saw it in your graduation program too, it was really wonderful. I mean, there wasn't a dry eye in that audience at the graduation. And many of the people weren't even graduating.
That's correct.
They were still just
supportive,
going through that. But it seems like it's almost run like an AA meeting, or like at least like a support meeting.
Yes, it is.
That everybody is there for one another. But it does seem that because of Veterans Court, they are simpatico. They have that shared experience. And does that help them through actually, it seems like a very rigorous program through Veterans Court.
It is a very intense program in the beginning, but then it takes steps where you kind of lessen the testings and things like that. But the program is self-supportive from other vets because even the guys that have graduated, they are now our mentors. So they come back and they help the guys, and we do have a female in there in Veterans Court now. They help each other. They refuse to leave anyone behind, and that's their sayings, not mine. They refuse to let anyone fail.
Right. But you also have sobriety court. And sobriety court, of course, is with the court system that allows people, especially with second drunk drivings or things that they might normally go to jail for, but the court puts them through a rigorous program, a rigorous a court program that's separate from probation. Tell us what that is.
Sobriety court was developed in our court at least 11 years ago, and actually we're going on 12 years now. And it's a treatment-based program, and for the community, you know, for some people out in the community that might not really understand what that means, it's a very intensive form of probation that focuses on treating the problem. Where, you know, you might read some of these criminal histories and think, how is this person not in jail? But the bottom line is our jails have been overcrowded for a really long time, and a lot of people are being let out early anyway, and then we lose complete jurisdiction over them.
And isn't it the worst place to treat the mentally ill, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But definitely substance abuse is simply by locking them away.
Well, obviously there's no treatment in jail, and jail has a purpose, you know, I mean, there are times where a person just really does not want the treatment or the help, and, you know, they're at the point where there's really no other option for them. Sobriety court gives us another, an option between probation and jail. We fall in that category, the middle. Sobriety court requires a person to actually address their problem, and if they refuse to address their problem, they do go to jail. So it allows the person to just really take a look at what got them there. It's a very intense form of probation. It starts out with the person seeing their probation officer weekly, testing every single day, interlock in their car. It enables them to continue in society, but with these constant checkpoints on a daily basis through 12-step programs and their counseling, and some of them require inpatient treatment. We come up with a protocol that assists them to address their needs.
So, Mike, but what is the difference of how, like, for instance, with sobriety courts, it sounds like Veterans Court, but just with veterans. Are there differences like that?
Veterans Court is based off the sobriety court model.
So it's very similar to the sobriety court,
That's correct.
except only for veterans.
And it is an alternative to jail.
Well, and that goes back to some of the things that I've seen in my practice too, of course, is people, I think people don't realize that there is a veterans court many times. And they don't know to choose to be able to be in the veterans court because that local court doesn't have a sobriety court, or definitely doesn't have a veterans court. Can you choose to go anywhere in the state? Because there are other veterans court, right?
There are other veterans
Other
courts.
than just Novi.
Right.
That's correct.
Can you, for instance, live in an area that doesn't have a veterans court and choose to go to Novi Court?
That's kind of funny because now the people know we have a veterans court. We're getting phone calls from all over.
Daily.
I'm sure.
I get phone calls daily. I have I have a defendant who's in Sanilac County. Can they be in, I mean, do they want to drive? Because we're not going to turn anybody down.
Right, but that gets back to what we were saying, like the support. It's really run, isn't it, where you have to be completely involved. You
Yes.
have to be going to the meetings. You really have to be involved as if it's a local area where you can go, like we said, to an AA meeting.
Right.
You can't just choose to go somewhere else. And we're actually at drug court, and we talked about it before, drug court last year in Lansing, and they were talking about the teleconferences that can allow you to have, where there is no drug court, let's say, or no sobriety court, where potentially could have that in other areas. And I thought that'd be great for Veterans Court, to have veterans in other areas to be able to use it. Do you think that would work?
Yes.
I mean, it's definitely better than not having it at all.
At all.
Right.
You know, obviously the preference is that face-to-face contact. I mean, Michael greets these people. I mean, it's unbelievable, his relationship with the defendants. You know, obviously as a supervisor, I monitor him for other reasons, but but he's
She's your boss.
Yeah. Okay. You don't say it out loud.
but he's, you know, he's just an outstanding connection to the court for them, because it takes the court portion out of it for them.
Right.
You know, they often forget what they're even there for. I mean, yeah, he monitors their conditions and he makes sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, but it gets to a point where it's just something they do, and then they come and see him.
One of the things that you talked about, jail, is punishment. I mean, that is our punishment for people breaking the law, and definitely, though, for breaking probation.
That's
because
correct.
when they're in this sobriety court or veterans court, they're on probation, right?
That's correct.
Are they tougher on the people in there if they violate probation, or is it easier than if you're just on straight probation?
No, it's harder.
It is definitely harder.
Because that was my perspective. I think it seemed like, because you're so involved with it, even more than, quite frankly, a regular probation, there are escalated, you know,
Sanctions.
jails and sanctions for
That's
it.
correct.
Right.
Do you think that helps people?
I do.
Why?
The sanctions, it holds them accountable.
So it's better to have someone have it over their head that they are more likely to go to jail?
You got to remember, a vet is used to structure. So he or she is going to know that with this action, there's going to be some consequences. And it's explained to them in the beginning, and they still sign up for it.
Do you have, first of all, does it include domestic violence?
Correct.
So people that are charged
Yes.
with domestic violence?
Yes.
What about the families? Do they participate at all in the Veterans Court?
Yes.
How does that help? How does that work?
Well, you were at the graduation. You saw the family members
Right.
there. Sometimes they'll even come to their review hearings with the judge, and sometimes they'll even come to the probationary meeting that they're having with me, because they want to know what's going on. And usually, I don't want to say a normal probationer,
Standard.
standard probationer, the family members don't show up. But for a vet, it's not only affecting them, it affects the family. So they show up too.
And that is one of the things that I've seen always in my practice too. And and you tell me if it's wrong, the support people get, whether it's in the community, but definitely at home. I mean, it's so hard, just seems something as simple as quitting smoking. To quit smoking when your spouse is still smoking. When you have substance abuse issues, when you have, whether alcohol or using controlled substances, if there's no family support there, or someone else is the issue and the problem, it is so much harder to heal. And I think Veterans Court would be great for any family member that is having those issues to cooperate and to attend those sessions.
That's correct.
So I really think I think it's a great program.
Also, some of the vets that are returning, if they're in those situations, they don't have a license. So who do you think
The
brings
driver's
them?
license.
A driver's license.
Right.
So a family member is always bringing them to court, taking them to an AA meeting, taking them to the Ann Arbor VA or the Detroit Dingo, whichever they prefer to attend. They have to have the support.
And participating, correct me if I'm wrong, in sobriety court and Veterans Court, you can get a restricted license during the pendency of while you're in that court.
That's
Is that correct?
As long as it's a drinking and driving offense, if it's a
Right.
second or more. Signing up for that program does enable us to allow a restricted license upon compliance. And of course, they have a breathalyzer in their car, and what better way to assure this person is not going
Sure.
to drink and drive in your community than have a breathalyzer in their car that stops them if they do.
Well, that's a different discussion whether or not we should have breathalyzers in
right.
our cars. I want to thank you both for coming here and explaining Veterans Court, because I really think it's an important program.
Thank
and
you.
Thank you
we'll
for
be
having
right
us.
back.
It's Timothy Green's first day at school.
What's in there? He's about to fall over.
Anything he might need. There's a box of tissues on the bottom and some Band-Aids. There's a whole first aid kit, actually.
Mom, I can handle it from here.
You don't have to be perfect
Have a great day.
That's too much pressure.
Have the day you have.
to be a perfect parent.
There are two people in the world who want you more than anything. They'll make some mistakes, but they will love you more than you can ever imagine.
There are thousands of children in foster care who will take you just as you are.
Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Scott Weinberg. And today we're going to continue talking about domestic violence. Does domestic violence and guns seem more prevalent today? Even after the shock of this recent killing in Connecticut, we are forced to ask ourselves, is violence from guns that take place every day, in everyday settings, in our homes, in our communities, are they common or are they the exception? Do guns seem to contribute more to domestic violence, let's say, or is it really due more to complicated issues like substance abuse or mental health? Well, we are joined today by Todd Flood, one of the most prominent criminal defense attorneys and former prosecutor in this area. Welcome to the show, Todd.
Thank you.
We're
sir.
also joined by Alexandra Black, Chief Probation Officer at Novi District Court here in Michigan. Welcome back.
Thank you.
You know, Todd, one of the things that we see in our practices too, and a question I wanted to ask is, are guns involved in domestic violence? Are we seeing them more, or do you see ever any guns involved in your practice in domestic violence?
Yeah, guns are used in domestic violence, unfortunately so, when you have the ability to have guns in your household and the like. Domestic violence is something I think we see with times of the economy being bad, or the households being in situations where there's addictions or there's problems and there's tensions and the marriages start to separate and you're basically in a spot where it's unhealthy.
So more stressful situations.
Sure.
But people, I mean, I can't remember the last time I had just a typical domestic violence case where, let's say, someone has a concealed permit, right? So they legally went through the training, they went through the actual certification process,
Right.
and that they threatened their wife or their spouse with a gun. I mean, do you see that in the probationary offices? Do you see them threatening the spouses with the guns?
Sure, we do. You know, once a person is arrested for domestic violence, we conduct a pre-sentence investigation. And during that investigation, we speak to the victims and ask them about prior history of violence in the home. And often they remark to us, if there's a gun present in the home, that they've been threatened by their spouse. You know, perhaps the spouse has put a gun to their head at some point and said, "Beg for your life," or...
So you do see that?
Oh, yeah,
where
we
people
see
are
it.
threatening with the guns.
Oh, yes.
Are these people, are they legally having the guns? Are these, you finding that they have CPLs? Or are these just illegal guns in the home?
Well, you don't necessarily have to have a CPL just to have the
Right.
gun in the home. So, you know, this is a legal gun they've purchased. It's registered to them, and it's just in their home.
So they could be a hunting rifle, it could be something that
Yeah.
is not really registered, or that they're not trained necessarily to use either.
I mean, a lot of people aren't trained the way they're supposed to be trained to use guns. I mean, that's just my opinion, obviously. But
When you get them on probation, though, and they're on probation, let's say for domestic violence, they can't have a gun in the house.
right. And I think that, I mean, the real issue here is we're putting them on probation so that they can receive treatment, obviously, for domestic violence and a lot of times substance abuse issues, mental health issues. I mean, in any of those circumstances, you wouldn't want to give someone something that they can use in the heat of the moment or an impulsive action, obviously.
Todd, what is the number one reason that you see in your practice for people that are charged with domestic violence? Is it through, like you're talking about, the anxiety, or is it through substance abuse?
Well, you know, in my practice, I always try to come to the reason of what's the root of the problem. Why is this person got an anger issue? Why is it that they can cross a boundary and actually, and it's not just men on women, but why any person can cross a boundary and think they can assault somebody. And once you get to that root, then you can kind of figure out some data. We want to look at certain things. Stress, anxiety, alcoholism, drugs, financial issues, all a combination thereof or one in of itself. Or you can go back further in time and look at where this person came from and how they dealt with problems in the past. Guns in and of themselves are really a separate issue, but when they're accessible, as Ms. Black has said, when they're accessible, it just makes that person that crosses boundaries all that more, I guess, easier for them to commit the assault.
Right, we were even talking about, just before the break, about what happened in Connecticut, where it was such a tragedy, and yet is making this either assault weapon or even the handguns available, in this case, to a young man. He was 20. He wasn't able to get it, or at least not legally. He wasn't able to buy it unless it was provided or at least available to him in the house. And that's what you're talking about. If you really have them available, but you have so many other things going on, substance abuse and other anxieties, it's hard to know what to have in your house or not, or what weapon they're really going to use.
There's got to be some common sense here, and sometimes that's not so common. When you think about it...
Boy, isn't that the truth?
Yeah, and when you think about it, there's telltale signs. This is a perfect time if the legislature or the government wants to put in gun control. This is a perfect time. But if we study this, I think someone just came out with the fact that gun incidents and this mass shooting happen more often than we know. This one is so tragic and so ugly, but I bet you if we studied it and we looked at it, there were a lot of telltale signs that could have prevented this from happening. Gun control, this is something that needs to be put in place to the extent assault rifles, I'm not quite sure what they're used for other than assault.
But you know, and Alex, you were talking about too, is that people have so many weapons, have weapons in their home. They're not registered weapons. They're, let's say, a hunting rifle. And yet, you know, people are going and legitimately hunting.
Right.
You would have people argue vociferously against gun control, especially when they're saying they're using it for target practice.
Right.
They're using it not necessarily to protect themselves, which that could be the argument, but they just might say, we want it for sport, we want it for hunting, up in keeping our deer population down. But when it turns to domestic violence, they're taking away those guns, whether they've been using them or not. Do you think that's fair? Do you think they should?
Absolutely.
So if someone hasn't used the gun for the violence, should we not allow them to have the guns if they're charged with domestic violence?
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. I feel that when we know that there's, as he said, people that are willing to cross these boundaries, and just to go back to even substance abuse doesn't make you commit domestic violence. It just makes you more likely to commit domestic violence if you already have that within yourself. You have that boundary issue. Guns aren't going to make you shoot the person. You have the problem, and then here you have this weapon accessible to you at any time. So, you know, long before my time, you know, people had decided that people that have domestic violence charges or convictions can't have weapons for that reason.
But they say, you know, the guns don't kill people, the people do.
That's right.
And that would be the argument, or one of them, of course, against what President Obama or any of the legislature, including Governor Snyder, is coming out with. Should we restrict people's access to guns, one, and then if they do have access to guns, where should they be allowed to bring them? Because that's what actually the governor was just addressing today, is they were expanding that, right? They were expanding it so you could bring it, what?
To
schools.
Right.
I mean, what timing for what happened compared to what he was potentially going to sign.
Right. And you know, I'm not a politician. I understand the Constitution. I understand the constitutional right of bearing arms. You know, I have a very difficult time taking away a right and putting restrictions on that. That's not something we should do easily. There are situations in this world as we grow. I mean, I'm sure the Founding Fathers didn't think of all the mediums of information we receive today as our iPhones go off and our iPads go off and everything else. So, and the medications and the drugs and all the other things that come into play. I do think that every case should be based on its four corners. An individual shouldn't be 100% prohibited from having a gun because he had an aberration in time, because there was something that triggered him to do something that was not his normal self. He lost it for a moment, and didn't physically assault somebody, but attempted to assault, or did put something in fear, or a person in fear. Now, does that person automatically, hey, listen, you're on probation, it's going to be under advisement, it's under the statute of 7694A, it's going to be gone. Should you be prohibited from having a gun for you to go hunt with your son, this thing that you go do with your family that you've been brought up? I'm not quite sure about that. I think you should have a gun.
Now, you're a former prosecutor.
Yes.
Did you have the same opinion when you were a prosecutor?
Yes.
Because prosecutors, they seem to have different opinions about that.
There is no cookie-cutter way to justice. If anyone wants to blanket cookie-cutter prosecution, I don't think they're being a lawyer. Justice is based on all four corners, and the U.S. Attorney, all the way down to our Eastern District, wants to look at cases based on the case itself. If we said the assembly line, all cases get prosecuted this way, then you're really not going in the direction of justice.
And we were talking before about judges, too.
Sure.
One of the worst things to have in the court system is a judge that won't look at an individual person or individual case and want to sort of just fit him into a block of, okay, that is someone who is charged and committed domestic violence or pled to domestic violence. We'll treat him the exact way as everybody else, and quite frankly, his reasoning, like you were talking about, Alex, for the domestic violence could be completely different.
Oh, there's a
and
huge
his
variance.
problems are different.
Right.
Yeah, there's a huge variance.
Right.
We see in the PSIs that we're doing in the police reports that we get, you've got the situation where someone's going through a divorce and they argue about plates and whatnot, and then you've got the people that are, it's true domestic violence. And that is part of our job when we do the pre-sentence investigation to determine the difference between the two. You know, by the time it gets to us, we're just doing the investigation. But I agree that there's a lot of variance.
And the domestic violence in this takes us back to Connecticut, too, isn't necessarily, of course, on just your spouse.
Right.
It's on any family member, like you were talking about.
Right.
You know, a child on his parent, like this tragedy that happened.
Yeah.
Now, that's not what happened in the school, but clearly it was an aggressive, you know, a murderous, a deadly act on a parent. Not where we would always, or many people would think of domestic violence, is a husband having a fight with his wife,
Right.
or something like that.
Right.
Well, I want to thank you both for coming here. It's a much longer discussion. We'll have you both in talking about it because it is going to be happening. We are going to be having this gun control discussion immediately within this country. I want to thank you for joining us on The Lawyer's View, and come back next time. We'll continue with our gun discussion. Take care.